Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Venegoni. Here we have conversations with artists, healers, and activists who enliven the LGBTQ communities and who empower our queer spirits to flourish. My guest today is George Taxidis. George is a therapist in London, England, who is currently studying Jungian analysis. In 2016, George co-founded the Queer Social Dreaming Matrix, which now meets monthly to play with dreams in the queer community. The method brings together his interests of spirituality, Jung, radical politics, queerness, creativity, and imagination. He was also involved in creating the Queer Analytic Circle, a collective of psychoanalytic and Jungian practitioners who are interested in queer challenges to analytic theory and practice. George is an associate lecturer at Goldsmiths, University of London, where he teaches on introductory therapy courses and psychosocial studies, and regularly uses the social dreaming method with his students. Today we talk about the power of dreams to unlock messages for the collective, using the practice of dream association to stimulate communal insight. George also shares about his work with the Queer Analytic Circle to bring about change to the field of analysis, which traditionally has pathologized queerness. To learn more about the Queer Social Dreaming Matrix, visit facebook.com/Queer Dream Matrix. Hi, George. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello.
So, George, because the way I came across you and your work is through dream work, and I've been really wanting to have someone on the show for a while to talk about dreams, I wonder if you could start out by telling us how you first got interested in dreams and dream work.
I mean, I think probably I was always interested in dreams, but I think the main way in which I came across dreams and thought about them a bit more seriously was when I read a little bit more about Carl Jung, really. So at first I trained as a counselor some years ago, and as I was kind of searching for various different theories, because my initial training was integrative, and I was introduced to various different theoretical sort of approaches, I started reading about Jung, and I read his, well, people call it an autobiography, but it's not exactly an autobiography. He kind of dictated some of it, and the rest of it was kind of written by his secretary. The book called Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And reading about Jung's approach to dreams just felt really quite liberating compared to the more kind of classical, Sigmund Freud's kind of way of looking at dreams, which was about kind of uncovering the secret meaning of a dream, really, which, this kind of real emphasis on defense, really, that we're all defended and the dreams are kind of hiding these secrets about us. And suddenly I came across, Jung's approach, which was much more about, the dream is a message from my psyche. He's kind of possibly telling me the way forward or anticipating a way forward. I mean, often telling me things that I might not like to admit to myself or aspects of myself that I don't particularly like. And suddenly the more I took interest, I remember dreaming around the time I was reading Memories, Dream, Reflections, and my dreams just became quite transformed, really. What I say to anyone who's interested in sort of the social dreaming matrix practice, or when I use this practice in teaching, I tell all of my students that, if you take an interest in your dreams, they respond. If you take an interest in your unconscious in other ways, it seems that it responds and it kind of produces things. So that's been my experience. And since I read Memories, Dreams, Reflections by Carl Jung, I've been keeping a dream journal, which is now hundreds of pages long. And yes, I found it's almost kind of a regular practice for me to sort of be open and aware of my dreams, really. Mm-hmm. And of course of my patients or my clients' dreams. That applies to them too, really.
Yeah, the way that you described Jung's way of working with it reminds me of the way that my hypnotherapy teacher talks about dreams, which is she says that dreams are an email from your unconscious.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. That's a very wonderful 21st century way of sort of translating Jung's ideas, really. And I think what you're saying is, I suppose, there are various interesting ways of looking at dreams. I discovered later on that Gestalt has some very similar sort of approaches to Jung, actually. There is some sort of overlap. So very creative ways out there of kind of working with dreams, which is great.
Yeah. And I'll also agree with you that the more that you pay attention to them, the more you show an interest in them, the more they start showing up. A few years ago, I kept a dream journal for a while. And the way I sort of thought about it was that your dream memory is kind of like a muscle, but the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets and the more you remember. And it actually got to a place where it started to feel a little bit overwhelming for me, how many dreams were coming to me in a night and in a week. So I ended up stopping because I was just like, this is too much work to record all this information.
I can totally see that. And it's not uncommon really for people. And that's a critical sort of point, and I think sometimes, particularly if somebody is in a more intensive kind of therapy, because I practice kind of both kind of weekly therapy with my clients and more than once a week. That's when there is a bit more space really to connect with more sort of dream material really. If you see someone weekly often, there might not be enough time to look into a lot of dreams really. I think what you're saying is kind of very much connected to some of what Jung was talking about really. He was talking about how our relationship to our unconscious via dreams and other things really is a really tricky thing. Dreams can throw up really disturbing stuff that unless we are able to kind of find ways of making sense of them, I think unconsciously a lot of people just choose not to kind of look at them really, which is, I think, is understandable as well if there isn't the space to explore them fully.
Yeah. So you've already alluded to the social dreaming matrix, and I learned about you through the queer social dreaming matrix. Is this concept of a social dreaming matrix something that you created, or is this something that you discovered somewhere else, or something? Is it a Jungian concept, or?
I discovered this. Actually, interestingly, it came from group analysis, from the field of group analysis originally, from a guy called Gordon Lawrence, who died a few years ago. So he was a group analyst, and he discovered at some point when he was running groups, some of the dreams he felt were not actually about the particular dreamer, or they might have been about the particular dreamer, but they might also be speaking to the whole group. And he was very interested in that sort of observation of his. And either before that or after that, he also came across this book called The Third Reich of Dreams, which is this woman who collected dreams of German people before the rise or around the rise of the Nazis really in Germany. And I mean, I've been rereading that book recently, and it's a gem. It's a really interesting kind of book to read from so many different perspectives, from politics, from spirituality, and I think the social dreaming method has all of these different sort of ways in which it can be approached really. And basically she discovered various common themes in the dreams of German people before the rise of the Nazis that perhaps almost anticipated, developments that sometimes people couldn't have known about. For example, some of the dreams sounded like they were anticipating Orwell's novel 1984 and sort of the Big Brother and surveillance and like things like that. So there was something really, really interesting about the common kind of themes. And so Gordon Lawrence took this book and this observation that he made in group analysis, and he thought, well, why don't we have some kind of group that meets to sort of explore dreams? And this method then has been used by various people and in various kind of different contexts, really. So how I came to it is that as I was preparing quite some years ago to train as a Jungian analyst, in the process of training still, it's a very, very long and difficult sort of training. But before I started the training, I did some workshops on dreams at the organization where I'm training right now. And I was introduced to the method. And then I noticed that there were some conferences, often psychotherapy conferences or, whatnot, that offered social dreaming matrices in the morning before the kind of more intellectual kind of program, really. And I went to a conference here in London, which was organized by the International Association for Analytic Psychology, so for the International Jungian Association. And it was on Jung and political activism. And therefore, it made a lot of sense to have a social dreaming matrix. And it was such a powerful experience there as well. And that's where also I met Laurie Slade, who later on became the co-founder of the Queer Social Dreaming Matrix with me. We didn't quite get to talk then. We met later on in another sort of event, and I asked him, I'd really like to do this in the queer community, not knowing even anything about his own kind of sexuality, actually. And he said, well, I'd like to do this with the queer community. And we just started it initially as a one-off, and then we began doing it every other month, and more recently on a monthly basis.
I guess I'm curious what you see is the function of it. I mean, I get for you and your colleague that it's probably a big part of it is a professional interest, but I wonder what you've noticed that's come out of it, especially from people who maybe are more interested in dreams, but not really interested in analysis or psychology.
I mean, I think, it's a valid question. I mean, it's often quite interesting sort of talking to people about this. It's been very interesting, talking to my parents, and I'm telling them, what I do. And this seems so, so strange to them. I gather with other queer people and we talk about our dreams. What is it for, I think it's a good question, really. Why would we do that? So there are many, many benefits, really, I think. So I think for creative people, because it can be very useful, because a big part of creativity is around kind of having a bit of an open space where you can mess around and play around with ideas. And I think that's what the Dream Matrix does in a way. So I suppose to give a bit of an explanation of, perhaps I should give an explanation of what it kind of does, really, what it looks like, because I think you've attended it, but of course the vast majority of your audience would have not attended a social dreaming matrix. So what happens is that we share dreams, and then we share associations to each other's dreams, and then we kind of make connections. So you might share a dream, and then that might remind me of a dream of mine. And then the next person might be reminded of a piece of news or a piece of literature or whatever comes to mind, really. A story, a memory from the childhood, whatever it might be. And this is what some sort of theoreticians of social dreaming have called the associative unconscious. I mean, again, we don't need to focus on the jargon, but, it's kind of about making associations. It's about kind of messing around and playing around with ideas and seeing what, so creative people to start with find it really, really helpful, I think, and enjoyable as well. And I mean, obviously there are therapists. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a majority of people who attend are therapists, but for therapists, again, it can be very helpful to kind of cultivate this muscle of imagination, really. There are people who are very much into spirituality who might find it really interesting to connect with others. Because, I mean, eventually what always happens, invariably, is a kind of sense of community, a kind of sense of bonding, because we've kind of co-created something from our unconscious, really, which, I mean, usually it ends on a quite excited kind of tone because of that, really.
Well, I wonder if, how long have you been running the specifically Queer Social Dreaming Matrix now?
It's been just over 4 years.
Okay. So after all these years of doing it, I'm curious if you've noticed a specific effect on queer people or the queer community that you've seen come out of this, of, most likely strangers or people who are just starting to get to know each other, coming together and talking about their dreams, and maybe meeting with people and that they never would have met before, and talking about things we don't normally talk about in our regular day-to-day life. Like if you've seen a specific effect that it's had on queer people or the queer community in that way.
I mean, I think the main effect is just kind of a sense of awe, really, of the fact that our dreams sort of often show things that are quite sort of related. It's really quite remarkable that it always happens. And therefore, this sense of awe, for me, I mean, this is how I see my own kind of spirituality, if you like. It's a sense of awe towards the unknown, towards things that we have no idea about, really. Like, why is it that we dream similar things? We have no idea at all, really. So this sense of awe and this sense of bonding, what everybody who takes part seems to be saying afterwards, really. Mm-hmm. And people come a few times. People sometimes use stuff in their writings, develop ideas for their own kind of, projects, through it. But yes, it's quite varied, really. But I think the common theme is a sense of awe towards the unconscious, really, the unknown sort of stuff.
Well, I also imagine that in the same way, just to talk shop a little bit here, in the same way that going to just a regular process therapy group can feel normalizing about your everyday life and knowing, oh, like other people feel this way too, or other people have these challenges too, that we can also see the way that we have similarities in our unconscious as well. Like, oh, like other people have these really weird, strange thoughts and ideas popping up in their brain as well, too. And how is, what does that mean? Or how does that make me feel less alone, particularly as a queer person? The queerest part of ourselves, of our psyche, at least, our dreams, is very similar to what's happening with someone else in the community or across the planet even. The other thing that is interesting to me about like what's happening right now as we record this here in late April in the middle of coronavirus is that your group has gone from being in person to being online. And I was actually able to attend, even though I'm, practically on the other side of the planet from where you normally meet. And so I got to connect with queer people that I probably never would have encountered who are in England and Europe. And I think there was even someone from Kenya last week.
That's right.
And also hearing about what are the kinds of dreams that they're having too.
Yes, and also identifying some common themes, really. I think that's the interesting thing. So just to rewind a little bit to what you were saying about any kind of process group, that you will find this kind of normalization effect, which is really, really useful. But I think what I would add to that is that sometimes in a queer social dreaming matrix, things that we discover are a bit wacky, really, a bit crazy. I'll never forget one time when somebody shared a dream that contained this weird object that was made of silicone and all of that. And then just half an hour later, somebody else shared a dream in which there was something that seemed quite similar. And we almost, and in the first dream, that silicone thing was kind of squeezed a bit too hard and popped out of a tent sort of thing. And in the second dream, half an hour later, that thing appeared. And it was almost like, it wasn't as obvious as I'm making it sound to be, but I kind of made the link that, it almost looks as if that silicone thing popped out of your dream and popped into this person's dream, And these things can be sort of funny and wacky. And that's what I mean more about the sense of awe, really, that it can be quite sort of, it can make you feel less kind of, I suppose we can get all, with our intellectual minds, we can get all quite arrogant with our ideas and our views and theories of how things happen. I think one of the benefits of dreams is that it can make us a bit more humble in terms of all of that. We have no idea how these things are happening, and it can't be engineered. It happens very, very naturally every time we gather.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, I know that another project that you're just getting started is the Queer Analytic Circle. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, sure. So, I haven't really checked all of your episode podcasts, but I am guessing that you might not have interviewed that many people who are working kind of analytically. Maybe you have, I don't know.
Not that I know of, no.
Yes. And I think, again, possibly making assumptions here, it's not for queer people who want to become therapists to go into more psychodynamic, psychoanalytic or Jungian ways of working is not the most popular choice. And the reason is quite simple, that to put it really bluntly and clearly, and I don't mince my words when it comes to this, psychoanalysis and Jungian analysis really have a dirty history when it comes to queer people. In the UK was much slower than the rest, than America, really. I think in the US, there were movements to sort of free psychoanalytic sort of and Jungian analytic sort of therapy from homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia, really, much earlier than in the UK. Until just a few years ago, someone like me wouldn't be able to train as a psychoanalytic therapist. And ideas that would sort of suggest that somebody who's queer, somebody who's, gay, lesbian, trans, that they would train, it was a bit unthinkable because they were seen by the original theories, not 100% always, but very often as pathological, really. And unfortunately, there are some sort of pockets where that still is the case. So in my association, I think I'm one of the first queer people, not the first, but one of the first queer people who are training. And I don't think there's a huge number. Generally that sort of section of the therapy profession is not the most diverse in general. So in terms of race as well, is not hugely sort of diverse. So I suppose I was finding it quite frustrating because I had to do set reading for my training that very often included ideas that were very misogynistic, very homophobic, very clearly sort of gender essentialist, and racist, really. And whilst I understood that this was part of the history of the profession and that I needed to understand some of the ideas and put aside the sort of the more prejudiced stuff, I needed more of a space to explore alternative ways of thinking, So as it happens with some people from the queer social dreaming matrix who also happen to be psychodynamic therapists, we started sort of meeting and organizing a support sort of group that has a lot of, is very, very ambitious, really. We would very much like to change minds within the analytic profession to sort of think about queer people from a non-pathologizing point of view. And hopefully, because really, one of the things that's very current for, around the world, reparative therapy or conversion therapy is called, therapy where, whether implicitly or explicitly, the therapist is attempting to change one's sexual orientation or gender identity, really. And in order to prevent that from happening, we believe that really serious revisions of theory need to happen. Mm-hmm. And we also want to support any queer people who are going through analytic trainings who might find various kind of approaches frustrating, to have a space in which they can get support and read together, study together as well, And it seems to be going really, really well. And we are making an impact, really. We are trying to sort of change minds and hearts, really. And the ultimate, really, aim of that is for queer people to have access to a variety of therapies. For queer people to feel more confident to access psychoanalytic therapy or Jungian therapy, as well as other kinds of therapy, and feel relatively confident their therapist is not going to have pathologize their relationship style, their sexual practices, their sex or the gender of the partner and their gender reassignment thoughts or whatnot, really. So that's the idea.
I'm curious, just going back to what you were saying about reparative therapy and conversion therapy, because I'm not too familiar about what's happening in those regards, at least in the United Kingdom or in Europe. Are people there using analytic theory as a basis for supporting that, for supporting conversion therapy or reparative therapy? Because here in the United States, most people are using more of a Christian religious kind of background as supporting for the need to offer conversion because, the diagnostics here in the United States the American Psychological Association has removed those from pathology.
Yes. I do think that usually most reparative therapy takes place in sort of religious contexts, really. However, I do think that there is something, I think we talk about reparative therapy or conversion therapy and we imagine that it's just about someone who very clearly advertises themselves as, I can help you get over your awful homosexuality sort of thing, which, by the way, I've seen some adverts in Spain particularly where, again, I suppose to do with kind of religion there as well. So I don't think that we should be thinking about reparative therapy as only that, really. I think we need to be thinking about reparative therapy also in terms of people who might have alternative sort of relationship styles, and their therapist might very subtly convey that their relationship style is not quite right. They might not explicitly say that this is my aim, but and I think it's very difficult to work that out, really, The same with gender identity, really. And I think this is where it's really, really tricky. I'm not hugely concerned that a gay person would go to psychoanalytic therapy and would have a therapist who would try to, turn them straight. I am concerned particularly about trans people, really, because this seems to be the case that within the analytic community worldwide, I think, it's pretty clear that homosexuality is not to be altered, is not pathological. But there's various people who are still debating And that's a word that's being used, unfortunately, as if, it's under debate whether trans people are allowed to kind of express their gender expression, the gender identity, really. But there are, I think, analytic therapists who are going down the path of etiology, really, of going down the path of trying to work out why somebody is trans, because they want to potentially avert something like a sort of an intervention, such a hormonal treatment or operations. Because I believe, because of their own anxieties about what that is, really. And that's where I think there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, a lot of the work of the Queer Analytic Circle is about trying to rethink analytic theory particularly for the benefit of trans people, because there's been a lot of work in terms of homosexuality, but not enough in terms of trans people.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point, and it's great that you are doing that work to sort of get people to open their mind to saying, okay, just because someone has this and it's a struggle doesn't mean that it's a pathology that they need to go back to the gender they were assigned at birth. Or I imagine that maybe there might even be some therapists who are open to the people who are transgender, but maybe they might have some challenge wrapping their mind around someone who identifies as non-binary or gender fluid or something like that too, saying like, oh, well, there's something wrong that you can't just like pick something.
Which was the same sort of stuff that some people used to say about bisexuality, really,
Mm-hmm.
So, absolutely. There are some people who kind of find it a bit easier to understand sort of like, identity, a trans man or a trans woman. Or especially if the trans man or trans woman happens to be kind of quite gender conforming in a way, if they pass,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't make some people that uncomfortable, really. But when it comes to people who might kind of, be genderqueer, non-binary, yes, there might be more uncomfortableness. There are other areas where it's the other way around, actually. The non-binary idea somehow sits slightly easier. And I have to say, some Jungians find it a bit easier. You spoke about sort of the masculine and feminine, and we all carry the opposite, and all of that. So for some Jungians, it's kind of a bit easier to kind of get their heads around the non-binary sort of identity. But then they kind of really object, and they feel that their freedom is really limited by the trans community's kind of request to be recognized for who they are, really.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of battle we're faced with as queer therapists, really, in our community. And that's before we even get to the kind of troubles that the clients and our patients are facing, really, who might not know anything about all of that, but they might be facing kind of everyday transphobia, everyday homophobia, biphobia, bi-erasure, all of that.
Well, thank you for doing that work to bring that awareness forward. So, George, can you share with us a person, practice, or experience that has supported your queer spirit to flourish?
I think, to be perfectly honest, I think the practice that I sort of have regularly is my relationship with my dreams, first and foremost, and my community of queer dreamers, really. And I think I've talked about that already. I knew this question was coming, obviously, because I listened to your podcast. And I was kind of thinking how, I suppose spirituality can be, people imagine various things when we talk about spirituality, really. And for me, I think it's something quite much more simple. So I think I have a regular meditation practice. I'm very kind of fond of my local kind of Buddhist center, and it's a very special place for me. And I've been going there for quite many years. And they have taught me two types of meditation. One is just the simple sort of mindfulness of breathing. And the other one is the metta bhavana, which is the development of loving kindness, the cultivation of loving kindness, which is a very kind of old, basic kind of practices, but actually very profound where you persevere with them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really my spiritual practice that I kind of stick to, really, that and my relationship with the queer dreamers community, really.
Great. Yeah, I would agree. I think that the loving kindness practice is a very important and can be transformative practice. And it's something that I encourage a lot of people to practice, both sending loving kindness to themselves and to other people.
Absolutely.
So, George, where can people learn more about the Queer Social Dreaming Matrix?
So we have a Facebook page that you can search for, Queer Dream Matrix. And I think the best way really to contact us is to email us, drop us an email. It's a good old-fashioned sort of email, really. And we do have an Instagram account as well. So Queer Dream Matrix, again, if you search for that, you can follow us there. And my colleague, regularly sort of updates that and posts like interesting sort of pictures that often relate to the dreams that were shared in the last Matrix. And the email address is queerdreammatrix@gmail.com. And I suppose in addition, if anybody happens to be a psychodynamic or psychoanalytic or Jungian therapist in the UK, they can email the Queer Analytic Circle on queeranalyticcircle@gmail.com as well.
Okay. So I know that the Queer Social Dreaming Matrix was intended to be in person and recently has gone online because of shelter in place. And I'm wondering if you have ideas about keeping it online or maybe doing a little bit of both to have people join from all around the world, because I found it really exciting to be able to do that.
Yes, I mean, I'm really pleased. If you don't mind, I want to say just a couple of things about that transition as well, if that's okay. Just to sort of say that something important about this is, apart from the fact, I mean, it's been absolutely wonderful. As you say, we had people from Germany, somebody in Kenya, somebody in Italy, and you in the States, it was really, and from outside of London as well, we had a lot of people. So that's great. I mean, I suppose the other thing that we've been reflecting on, both in the Dream Matrix and in the Queer Analytic Circle, actually, is how this particular situation impacts on queer people. And we are curious to see whether this is expressed in the dreams, really. So one of the areas is actually, we've all been possibly teenagers or young people who couldn't express our sexual sort of identity or our gender identity, and therefore we're confined and limited to kind of online communication. And therefore this might well be re-traumatizing for many people. And we are very aware of that, and we want to kind of be interested in that. And this was reflected a little bit in the first online Dream Matrix, which you weren't at, where something that did come up a lot was a sense in which all of us were feeling like we were going back to childhood. And there were a lot of dreams that were kind of coming up around that. So I think it's a really interesting sort of time in terms of this, and we're really pleased to be able to offer it. But at the same time, we're picking up on a lot of sadness around this and the isolation. In addition to that, I think how many queer people might be in non-monogamous relationships. And right now we are invited to just sort of stay within one household and choose perhaps one of the many partners that we might have. All of this stuff are really important challenges that may well be feeding into the dreams. So just to get into your actual question, I think it's a really good idea. And I think we could begin something really, really interesting. And I'm very much up for it. So I think we should talk more about potentially continuing this after the coronavirus pandemic. I think there's a lot of things that we will try in a new way because of this crisis that, could develop into something useful after the crisis. And one of those is this connection with overseas queer people.
Well, George, thank you for being here and sharing about dreams and the Queer Social Dreaming Matrix.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Yes, as you know, I've been following your podcast for some time, so I'm very pleased to be invited to talk to you.
I work with many queer folks who struggle to get their needs met or who suffer from having their boundaries violated by others. Because you may not have been cared for the best, you might have a hard time identifying your needs. Or because you have been violated or bullied, you might not completely understand where exactly your boundaries are. If you'd like some help exploring your needs and building more resilient boundaries, head over to my website and download the free guide, Needs, Boundaries, and Self-Care Support for Queer Folks. This is a short introduction to help you start to shift and change your relationship to yourself and others, and to feel more safe and resourced day to day. So just head over to queerhealingjourneys.com/needs to download your free guide today. To find the resources we discussed today, find the show notes at thequeerspirit.com. And if you enjoyed the show, remember to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. This will help us reach and support more queer people all over. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.